Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to the AME Food Testing Show. Today's guest, Shawn Stevens, Esquire, food defense attorney, as he discusses the peanut executives recently indicted in a 2009 Salmonella outbreak case. Shawn is an equity member of the law firm of Gass Weber Mullins. He is one of the only lawyers in America who dedicates his practice entirely to representing the food industry. During the past decade, Mr. Stevens has counseled food industry clients throughout the country, including some of the nation's largest producers, national restaurant chains, and several food distributors and grocers on a wide range of food safety, regulatory, and liability issues. Mr. Stevens works closely with food companies to identify and manage risk, plan and prepare for possible crises, and also respond appropriately to government enforcement actions and recalls. Mr. Stevens has also defended food industry clients against high-profile foodborne illness outbreaks claims in more than 20 states throughout the country. Now, welcome with me, Mr. Shawn Stevens, attorney. Shawn?
Hey, Andy, how are you today?
Great. I'm very excited about today's topic. Let me review briefly with our audience. In 2009, the FDA investigated the outbreak of Salmonella at a company called the Peanut Corporation of America and their plant in Blakely, Georgia. Could you review those facts with us, Mr. Stevens?
Yes, absolutely. This was a really interesting time sort of in the history of food production and food safety and frankly, monitoring and tracking foodborne illnesses and outbreaks. We were a couple years into, as I would characterize it, the growth and maturing of PulseNet and our ability on a nationwide scale to be able to track and identify foodborne illnesses as they were being reported by individuals throughout the various states, and then also collect that information and use that information to solve outbreaks. Just prior to this, we had a whole bunch of media attention associated with leafy greens processed or produced out on the West Coast that led to a number of 0157 outbreaks. Awareness was increasing. More and more doctors and hospitals throughout the country were beginning to pay more attention to the possibility of foodborne illnesses affecting their patients. And we're testing more, and we were seeing more. And at the same time, we saw, well in advance of 2009, actually, in 2008, a slow trending upward of Salmonella cases throughout the country. And historically, we've always had sort of what I call background static or background noise. We expect to see a number of Salmonella and other types of foodborne illness pathogen-related illnesses at any given time, but in 2008, the summer of 2008, those few sporadic cases we typically see started to trend upward. And more cases began to appear, really without any clear idea as to what was causing these illnesses. And what also made it interesting during this period was that they were we saw an uptick in the numbers, but they were pretty widespread. In your typical outbreak, you'll have a slug of contamination that goes out with some food products, and that will result in sort of a spike of illnesses as that product is consumed and then goes away. Well, in this case, those illnesses kept trending upward, right? There was no real spike. They just kept increasing. And it was clear to investigators that something was going on behind the scenes. There was what appeared to be anyways a lasting and prolonged introduction of this type of Salmonella into commerce that was getting people sick, but everybody was kind of scratching their heads as to what it might be. And it wasn't until really November and December, deep into the fall and early winter of 2008, and then transitioning into the beginning of 2009, that the number of illnesses actually really began to intensify even more. And we started to see sort of that traditional spike, although it was really more like a mountain peak because there was a great deal of illnesses that were already being recorded and investigated. But with that spike, more and more resources and more attention were put into ultimately attempting to solve what it was that was making all of these people sick, and then ultimately, as you know, causing a number of deaths. And it was difficult, this particular outbreak, to investigate because the cause, what ultimately determined to be peanut butter, is a very common food product, right? So not everybody eats spinach every single day. So when you have an outbreak being caused by spinach, it's easy to identify that as a possible culprit when only a smaller percentage of the greater population eats it on a regular basis, and only those people who are actually eating it are getting sick. Peanut butter is a little different. Peanut butter comprises, is a part of almost every single person's diet, whether it's in the form of peanut butter itself, or it's an ingredient in ice cream, or if it's in a granola bar, or if it's in another type of food product. So identifying, peanut butter as a common denominator amongst, sick people, it's everybody's eating it. So it's difficult to trace and track outbreaks when a common food item like that is involved. And what ultimately broke the investigation open is investigators from the state of Minnesota, a top-notch public health department in Minnesota, nationally regarded as one of the best, saw a number of cases involved with a nursing home or assisted care facility, and began testing some of the products that those individuals there were exposed to, including a 5-pound canister of peanut butter. And lo and behold, they found the outbreak strain in that peanut butter. And that's what really broke the investigation open and enabled health department investigators to, in early January, conclude finally that peanut butter was the source, or peanut-related products were the source of the bacteria that had been making people sick now for nearly over half a year. And that, of course, as we saw, ultimately led to a number of different discoveries and consequences as the investigation sort of turned its focus and more facts began to unfold.
Well, Shawn, the CDC reported that there were 714 that were sickened and 9 deaths related to this outbreak in 46 states. That's a significant number.
It really is. And what was interesting is more than half of the victims, those 714 case patients, were children. And that's, you expect, I guess, to see those types of numbers because children, they eat a lot of peanut butter, right? Peanut butter and jelly sandwiches when they're going to school, or other types of products that will carry it. And they're also the most susceptible because they're kids. And with regard to the deaths, we saw on the other end of the spectrum individuals who were elderly or had immune systems that just weren't quite as robust, perhaps, as they once were. And in a product like this that so many different people have exposure to, and with contamination as widespread as it was, it's very unfortunate, but the consequences ultimately, as you noted, were very, very severe in this case.
Shawn, another point that's interesting about this case is that it was one of the nation's largest food recalls in U.S. history, involving thousands of products because the base product was peanuts.
Right, and demonstrates, I think, pointedly how, and this should be a lesson for anybody, whether they're intimately involved or they merely dip their toe into the food industry. This should be a lesson for us all. No matter how careful we think we are within our the own four walls of our processing facilities, or with our own operations, or with the folks that we're selling products to or receiving products from, there's a lot of different companies, depending on the food product, but for most food products, take granola bars as an example, that have a large number of ingredients. And there's a lot of different companies in the chain of the production of that product making those ingredients and contributing. I'd say a lot of fingers or hands in the cookie jar, so to speak. And it only takes the actions of one It only takes the actions of one company to cause an event like this, to spread contamination or introduce it and allow it to spread throughout the entire system, and to put every other company, conceivably, that's downstream in a very bad position financially, or even put them out of business. And when we're dealing with a case like this, where PCA, Peanut Corporation of America, was making very, very, very high volumes of peanut and peanut-related products and shipping them across the country to hundreds, ultimately thousands of different customers, either directly or in the form of ingredients. Tens of thousands of products ultimately were affected, and the consequences were just exponential. And I recall early on writing about the initial recalls, and it was in early January. I think January 13th was the first voluntary recall of a few select products that quickly expanded to January 16th to involve some additional products. And the days that followed, every single day we saw more and more food products being affected, and we quickly began to realize, almost with a gasp, how widespread this problem was becoming. Imagine a small grass fire that turns into a forest fire, just spreading across the land. And that products, started with, peanut butter crackers, and then began involving ice cream products with peanut butter, and then chocolate and candy products with peanut butter, and then all sorts of bakery products with peanut butter, and cookies, energy bars, pet food, dog biscuits were implicated, eventually cookie dough, turtles, right? And especially when we got towards Valentine's Day with all the different, imagine all the different kind of candies and products that people like to give to each other over Valentine's. Not a single one, it seemed, was spared. And we got to a point with the the recall, where it was almost too difficult to manage announcing to the public all of the products that were implicated. So what we started doing, Andy, was making an effort to identify the products that weren't implicated, right? So the press releases started announcing all the products that you could buy safely. So it was, unheard of. It was in my view, the largest and most complicated and most expansive recall in American history. And I truly hope that remains to be the case, that none others in the future outpace this one. But you're right. It absolutely made history.
Well, Shawn, let's talk about the causation. And it is a legal term relating to what started the damages chain. When the FDA performed an inspection at the plant, the conditions they found were primarily dirty and unsanitary.
Yeah, that's right. And remember, we weren't dealing with just one facility here. Ultimately, that we thought we were in the early days, and ultimately expanded to two. The facility in Blakely, Georgia, was where the initial focus was, and where the initial recalls ultimately were announced from. And as the investigation began to continue, investigators realized that there was a second facility in Plainview, Texas, that was also producing product under similar conditions. And the investigation kind of focused on both facilities and the conditions that existed in both. And that's right. When investigators arrived, they found conditions that were less than optimal. There was, this is in my view, a push to put out a lot of product, but the operationally, the support for that goal, the types of equipment that were being used, the adequacy of the facilities, how well they were being maintained, how secure they were, the quality of the equipment being used, even as things as basic as the direction of the airflow, were things that were lacking and deficient in this case, which easily explained how once contamination was introduced, it was allowed to spread to numerous and different types of products. And through the testing that was being conducted, albeit sporadic and intermittent, of the products that were being produced and shipped out, what's interesting here is the company knew, right, that these issues environmentally were creating problems because they were finding pathogens in the finished product. And what that should have told the company is, hey, there's a reason for this. There's, to borrow your term, a cause or a root cause. We need to identify and determine what that is, and then make sure we prevent it from happening again. And that analysis never occurred. Rather, business continued. The deficiencies were never addressed, and the contamination problems over time at least stayed the same, if not got very, much worse.
Well, Shawn, at this point, I'd like to interject again my introductory remarks that you, in your practice, and again, many attorneys are on the plaintiff side. You're on the company side. You're on the defense side generally. And let's talk about the company's own food testing program and how they found salmonella contamination, but continued to ship its products. How would you, and this is kind of like Monday morning quarterbacking situation, how would you advise a client in that same or similar situation?
What I tell my, well, there's a couple things actually. What I tell my clients is, and I'm a strong advocate for doing whatever you can do to decrease your window of exposure. When we're dealing with pathogens, I get it. Nobody ultimately is immune when we're talking about industry. Despite your best efforts, despite everything that you do, despite all the interventions, despite all the testing, despite all the resources that are directed towards eliminating or combating pathogens, there's still a chance that they might slip through. But we do the world a favor, we do our consumers a favor, we do our customers a favor, and ultimately we do ourselves a favor if we're out there aggressively looking for these pathogens in our incoming ingredients and in our outgoing finished products. And if we're really looking for them and we're trying to find them, we are going to find them. And we're going to be able to take those products and divert them. And then we're going to be dealing on a playing field where we have a much higher level of confidence that the ingredients or food products that we're dealing with are not contaminated. And we're also decreasing the opportunities for those contaminants to make their way into our facilities, into our equipment, or to find niche areas, or at least to proactively eliminate those risks when they're there. And if we're leaning forward and we're chasing down those risks and we're trying to identify them, we're going to find most, and we're going to decrease that exposure window. So that's right out of the gate the advice that I give my clients. And then I tell them, if you ever find it, and this kind of gets into the reportable food registry and companies' obligations to report to the FDA, and sometimes questions are posed to me, well, we received these ingredients, we've got them, we found some salmonella, do we need to report to the agency? What if we didn't? It's, the customer is, a close relationship, we've been doing business forever, we trust them, and, the message I send to these guys is, once you've done everything you can internally to decrease the risk that pathogens are going to be found within your own systems, okay, if something like that happens, if they squeak out, if they get out, or if you got raw materials from somebody who and you find bacteria in them, it's absolutely critical that you understand if pathogens are out there, they're going to be found by somebody else. So if you've produced and shipped product, okay, and maybe you did detect it, and hopefully you didn't ship. But if you produce and ship product and you didn't detect it, but it's there, chances are somebody else is going to find it. And they're going to find it in two different ways. Either one of your customers is going to do sampling of your products, just like you might be sampling ingredients you're getting from others, and they're going to get a positive hit, okay? Because as a system, we're doing so much more testing. And they're going to find it. Alternatively, some consumer is going to buy it off the shelf, take it home, eat it, feed it to their kids, and somebody's going to end up in the hospital. And the doctor's going to order a culture, and they're going to find it there. So we live in a world where no longer, and I think critical for companies to understand and realize that you can't if you're aware of pathogens existing in a particular product or ingredient, you can't assume that nobody else is going to find out, because they will. There are thousands of companies conducting tens of thousands of tests at any given moment of any given ingredient or any given finished product, in addition to doctors spread across the country who are treating thousands of patients at any given time. Everybody looking for those pathogens. And now, where we can match them genetically, when we find them, there's a good chance we're also going to figure out where they came from. So, how would I have advised this company? Well, number one, increase your testing. Test more so we can figure out where the pathogen is originating from. How is it getting introduced and why? And how can we stop it from occurring? Number two, because we're finding it, rest assured, if we're seeing it, somebody else is going to see it too. And don't you dare ever ship that product. A, because we owe it to our customers and consumers. But B, if you ship it, somebody somewhere somehow is going to discover it. Of course, that's exactly what occurred here.
Well, Shawn, your advice, again, Monday morning quarterback, is excellent. I would like to now review with you the most distressing part of this federal case against these executives, and that's apparently their examination of PCA's scheme to fabricate certificate of analyses, or COAs, accompanying the shipment of products. And apparently they reviewed the internal emails and came up with that theory that has not been convicted yet, but is pretty close. Can you review that with us on the internal scheme to fabricate COAs?
Right. Very, 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 in my mind, distressing. The system, the food safety system in this country can and will only work if all companies tell the truth. And just on a human level, if we say we're going to be testing our products for pathogens that can put children in the hospital or kill people, we better be doing it. And as a consumer, yeah, I'm a lawyer, but I'm also a consumer, and I have children, and I grocery shop, and I make them food. I want to have assurance that all of the companies that were involved in producing the product that I'm eating have done their job. And part of that is telling the truth. And when you have a company, which it appears like this one, who was fabricating or misrepresenting or creating false certificates of analysis, the entire system falls apart. The entire system, the integrity of the entire system is put in a place where it's suddenly questioned. And for that reason, I agree strongly with what investigators and the Department of Justice in this case ultimately concluded, which was the alleged acts and circumstances here were sufficient to warrant significant criminal penalties, and thus sufficient and worthy of being pursued from a criminal standpoint. We as I represent, as you noted, a lot of companies, and I've been fortunate over the years to work with companies that have incredible commitment to food safety, wonderful food safety cultures, the resources enabling them to hire the best and brightest and make them part of their food safety team. And it's been wonderful for me to be able to work with and learn from and share with those types of clients. And again, it's very discouraging when you see this happen. It's also discouraging from another standpoint, because what PCA, put aside the fact that this involved a lot of peanut butter, implicated a lot of products, and it really hurt a lot of different companies. What it does is it hurts food safety in total, because if this company is getting away with producing and shipping high volumes of products without having to pay for or invest in the testing that everybody else is doing, and without having to divert the products that are testing positive to another use, which everybody else is doing. They're the company that ultimately, until everything falls apart, is going to get an increasing amount of business, the most business, right? Because they're selling the highest volume of product at the lowest price. And that's really discouraging, because what that means is the companies that are doing their job, that are doing right things, that are committed from a food safety standpoint to looking for, finding, and detecting pathogens in their food products are going to be sort of pushed aside, right? Because the cost of their products are a lot higher. So for a wide variety of reasons on multiple levels, I think it's great that DOJ decided to look very closely at this, and I think it's appropriate that in these circumstances, the relevant agencies are treating this very, very seriously and taking the steps that we've recently seen.
Well, Shawn, we know now that Daniel Kilgore signed a plea agreement recently for mail fraud, the introduction of adulterated and misbranded food into interstate commerce with the intent to defraud or mislead, and conspiracy. Now, the charges were filed by the U.S. Attorney, but were also investigated by the FBI. There are currently 3 other executives pending charges. Let me ask you in summary, what are the lessons for the food industry? I think you've said them throughout our interview today, but if you could summarize the challenges and the lessons for all food executives, whether they be in food production, food quality, food safety, or food security positions.
Right. I think the primary lesson is start paying more attention to food safety. Start paying more attention to it. We've seen this tension over the years between high-level corporate executives involved in various companies within the food industry and their quality assurance or food safety teams or departments. And that's because their interests they're ultimately aligned, but the way, as a subset, some of those interests, they aren't completely aligned. And there may be some tension between increasing the company's profits, which ultimately at the end of the day is the goal, but increasing those profits or investing in new technologies that are going to perhaps make a food product even safer. And we've seen, at least in recent years, it's changing, but a lack of understanding or comprehension or even commitment by some corporate executives to food safety. And there's a lot of different reasons for that. One obvious reason is sometimes a corporate leadership involved in a particular food company is new to the industry. Now, somebody transitioned over from a different industry but was a great corporate leader and was inserted in a high-level position in a food company. Just doesn't get it, doesn't understand food safety or the science. There's circumstances where those corporate executives are dealing with a wide variety of other issues like employee issues or union issues or other types of issues that inherently are involved with operating a large company and all large companies, and they take up a lot of time and they take a lot of attention and they cost a lot of money. So food safety sometimes is sort of put on the back burner. And more recently, with more attention and more awareness relating to food safety, we've seen a better job, or corporate executives, I think, becoming more and more committed to teaching themselves and learning, becoming engaged from a food safety standpoint. But I think what this teaches us is you need to become even more engaged, okay? Because the consequences used to be, at least it was perceived, well, darn, if I ship out some product and it has some Salmonella in it, if somebody finds out, well, I guess I'm going to have to recall it. And what's that going to cost? And, how does it affect the bottom line? And then how does it affect the brand? And what am I going to do about it? And, okay, we can, if we do these things, if we put together this crisis management program, if we follow these steps, we can hopefully minimize those damages, recognizing that they will occur. And those were, the consequences. On the other end, it might be, family business, we've been running for years, and boy, it might just cost enough that we'd have to go out of business. That's horrible, but, I guess, that's the cost of doing business. But now what this teaches us, and I think even more so if you put it in the context of Food Safety Modernization Act has now been passed. The preventative control regulations have now been published, and the U.S. Attorney and DOJ and the agency is now pushing forward for criminal sanctions against companies that have gone out and violated some of the underlying food safety principles. I think it's critically important for corporate executives to now recognize that in addition to those financial consequences, there's also personal liability. And it has to be a very, I'll concede, extreme circumstance where a corporate individual or a corporate leader would be subjected to criminal liability. But that's a risk that really was never thought about, talked about, and frankly didn't really exist, at least not in its current form, until just recently when we've seen the indictment. And I'd add to that corporate executives and corporate leadership should also consider, as they develop their policies and their operational culture internally, i.e. how are we going to train our management to deal with food safety issues, how are we going to train our employees to deal with food safety issues, to also recognize this personal liability component, because it could be just as devastating to a company if a mid-level manager made some of these bad decisions. They never make their way to the corporate leadership, yet when the investigation ensues and uncovers what middle management was doing, right, in an effort to please their bosses or increase their bonus or whatever the case may be, that could be tremendously damaging to a company and, of course, its brand when the media grabs hold of it. So it's another element of risk. It's another element of potential consequences that I think all corporate leaders, anybody involved in the food industry, should now, moving forward, begin thinking about.
Shawn, that was an excellent summary of the challenges that food executives face. I've actually given a number of food safety presentations to boardroom members, and these board members, there's eventually some finance guy there who'll say, Andy, we have insurance for that, and if I follow your safety protocol, it's going to cost us over $1 million a year. And then they politely escort me out of the building. And the challenge is that I really challenge all of those people that are casual about their food safety programs to download the indictment. It's very eye-opening. The FBI investigators investigated and copied all of the emails between the different executives, and I think it really, you bring it out, the personal liability component and the importance of internal communications.
Right. Yep, for sure. And that's another lesson, I guess, is in the midst of these types of incidences and investigations, that nothing's sacred. From the perspective of the government, we are investigating and trying to solve a public health issue. They will say, people are getting very sick, or in some cases, people are dying. And when they go to the judge to get their warrants or to obtain permission to secure those types of records or take the hard drive, they're going to get it because, saving lives is, in anybody's eyes, a big deal. So the investigating agencies in these outbreak scenarios will have a tremendous amount of power and authority and reach as it relates to being able to access corporate records. And I'll give you just another example with the passage of the Food Safety Modernization Act, and this wasn't in effect back in 2009, but it is now. The agency has, in the regulations that were issued in response to that act, the agency, FDA, has now given itself tremendous authority and power to secure a company's records. The standard now is, and this is the legal standard, if the agency believes, and the legal term here is believe, if the agency believes that a company's food product may be causing adverse health consequences, the agency has the authority to obtain and this is without a warrant or going to court, the agency, the FDA investigator, has the authority to obtain whatever records he or she needs, or the agency needs, to determine whether that food product is causing or has a reasonable probability of causing adverse health consequences. So if they believe your product is making people sick, they can go get whatever records they want, including conceivably hard drives, to make that determination. So it's a tremendous expansion of FDA power, and companies, frankly, should be aware of it, in this new and ever-changing landscape.
Well, Shawn, thank you so much for your time today. It is a very distressing topic, particularly for those involved in food production, food quality, food safety, and food security. And your perspective, I find particularly enlightening due to your national practice of food defense of companies that are involved in the food industry. I'd now allow you to offer any closing remarks on your practice and your services that you offer to the food industry.
Well, thanks so much, Andy. This is a very distressing topic. It is on many levels kind of sad, and I think it brings us all down to a certain extent. At the same time, it's a topic that, frankly, I think we can in part embrace, right? Because a lot of what we chatted about today was the things companies can be doing to avoid placing themselves in the same predicament or in the same circumstances, Mr. Parnell and others. And all of the different, initiatives that companies can be thinking about and pursuing and putting in place to make sure that at the end of the day, they're on the opposite end of the spectrum as PCA. We've been very fortunate, and me personally, working with, as I noted earlier, some of the company's largest food companies, helping them produce a safer, higher quality product. And we've been doing that in a couple of different ways. Number one, with well over 10 years defending companies in high-profile outbreaks and recalls, learning about the mistakes that those companies have made, the things that have led to those recalls, and then sharing that with others, our current clients, so that they don't repeat those mistakes. And seeing over the years all of the great things that companies have done to make sure that their products are as safe as they can be, and sharing those things with all of our new and existing clients. We also have had an opportunity to work with companies throughout the country on regulatory compliance, making sure that whether we're talking about FSMA or any other FDA regulations or USDA, that those companies are compliant with the requirements that are in place, and if they're not, how they can efficiently get there. And, of course, just general food safety consulting with companies from a brand protection standpoint, talking about things like food safety culture and different things companies can do to reduce that exposure window. And that, for me, is what I enjoy the most when I talk about my practice, because it's helping companies decrease their risk and produce a safer product that ultimately makes me feel like I'm contributing in a positive way to a better world. So thanks. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you today. And as always, would look forward to chances in the future to chat about whatever topic you think is pressing and your audience would like to learn about.
Well, thank you so much, Shawn Stevens. I appreciate your frank and open discussion on a very sensitive issue for all food executives. And thank you for your time. I look forward to your participation should another issue present your expertise and your national exposure opinion necessary. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Andy. Have a great afternoon.
You bet. Bye now.
Bye.